Welcome to The Sky is High, a podcast dedicated to the music and culture of Yunnan. I'm your host, Jonathan Heeter, and as always, I'm joined by Sam Debell, CEO, co-founder, and Minister of Production at Sea of Wood Records. How you doing today, Sam?
Very well, thanks, Jonathan.
So you were
What time
busy.
is it there?
What time is
What
it
time is it
here?
there for you?
It's
Uh,
10:14 p.m. in Los Angeles,
okay,
where I'm from right now. But it's okay. I've had about 16 cups of coffee and have a wee tipple next to me in order to make it through this.
a bit early for me here, so I'm on the water.
So you're joining us from Kunming, right?
Kunming. So it is one, yeah, it's just after 1 o'clock
All
in the
right, man.
in the afternoon.
Which is like the perfect time to be doing something like this, especially since last night you were, I assume, up pretty late at the opening of your club.
Yeah, I got back at 6 in the morning,
6 a.m.
6 a.m. Yeah,
Sun was up.
sun was coming up. Yeah,
That's always the
yeah.
best feeling when you leave the club and the sun is up. That's when you know things have gone really, really well or really poorly.
Well, I'd say both apply to what happened last night.
Well, it's also kind of a pretty good segue into the band we're talking about today, Puman, right? Who are a band who have had things go very well and very poorly. And, I think you once told me some bands are easy to work with, and then there's bands like Puman. So, really excited to be talking about them today with you and kind of really digging in onto their music and how it is sort of foundational to your label and also how it fits into this sort of broader musical phenomenon that it's kind of a cringeworthy term for us Americans, but I'm going to go ahead and call Yunnan reggae. Where are these guys from, Puman?
Okay, so they're from Yunnan, um, and Yunnan, for people who don't know, it's quite a big place. It's about the same like area as the UK,
Mm-hmm.
which okay, so it's like a small country basically. So and there's various different parts of it and very big differences between those different parts. So so in the north, as we talked about before, you've got the mountainous area, and then in the south you've got entering the subtropics, and the forests and slightly
Mm-hmm.
lower altitude. And these guys are pretty much all from the southern part of Yunnan, and their music's definitely mostly from there.
Mm-hmm.
So Pu'er, Sichuan Bana, Shimong, Monglian, like all, but around, yeah, all those southern areas which border on Laos and Burma, Myanmar, sorry, to sort of call it by the right name.
It's
So
hard not to
yeah,
call it Burma. You and I are of a certain age where we saw it on a map one way, and it's always hard. I mean, I also throw in a Czechoslovakia every now and then too, which really ages me.
yeah. So so yeah, so um, that's probably as good an explanation of where they're from as I should give without getting too precise and boring everyone.
Mm-hmm. So everybody should basically realize that where they're from, it's really hot, right? And there's a very good chance that if they've had one interesting cup of Chinese tea in their life that wasn't green tea, it might be from Pu'er, where some of these guys are from, right?
Yeah, I mean that's where all the tea in China came from. Apparently, it was when it was first drunk and where it all came from. And 99% of the old tea trees in China are in Pu'er or in
That's
Yunnan in
interesting.
general. Yeah,
So that's pretty crazy. I mean, we could obviously double click on that and do like a pretty massive thing into tea, which you and I will definitely do someday. But in terms of Puman, right? I've obviously spent a lot of time here digging into their music and their first record, and I think you correct me if I'm wrong, only record to this point from 2014 is pretty interesting because it's kind of a blend of a lot of different styles, right? You've got a lot of reggae, you've got some ska, you've got folk, obviously, you've got rock guitar, and even like some EDM. There's sort of a almost like a drop or two on the record, which sort of really took me back listening to it. Um, so I was sort of wondering if you could walk us through how the band was able to kind of pull so many styles into a record, and what it's sort of like pulling all of those different styles into a coherent sound.
Yeah, okay. Well, firstly, 2019, just to correct you on that. I forgot,
2019.
yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you after reading the brief about that, so I just let you mess that up without saying anything. But
It's totally, which is totally fair, by the way. It's my job to look at it. But what I will say is we should both yell at Ellie offline because it says 2014 on your website, which is where I copy, cut, and pasted that from.
okay, I probably wrote that actually, so it's gone full circle. But
It's okay. I'm prone to mistakes. I mean, last time we talked, I invented a time signature that the outro for Uncle John's band was in, and have actually been hearing about that from all of my former coworkers who have seen it. So yeah, I mean, whatever accuracy, it's fine. 2019.
2019. Okay, so one part of the reason is, and this happened in China in like for a lot of music, it didn't come in it didn't come in a linear way. It came in blocks,
Mm-hmm.
gestalts of music. Like, suddenly you've got reggae, but you've got like 30 years of reggae all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not so aware of the differentiations between different kinds of reggae and where how it all fits together. And like a reggae aficionado in the West would know everything about that. But in China, they don't have that distinction or what's to say the luxury of being able to kind of define it that way.
Right.
So one of the reasons is just that everything's mashed up together the way they've been learning about reggae, which in a way organically created this kind of attitude, which is you can just put everything together and without questioning it. Okay, oh no, it's kind of a roots song. We shouldn't be putting DDM into it. No kind of qualms about that kind of stuff. And the other thing is just a combination of the influences of the artists that wanted to put stuff into it. The EDM
Mm-hmm.
part was done by a DJ called DJ Major Tom, who was a friend of Sean, the bass player, who was invited to put that bit into the song as a guest performance. So that's where that came from.
No, I can't resist. I'm trying to resist. I'm trying to make myself resist, but the audience could kind of insert its own ground control joke about Major Tom inserting the reggae bits into there. It feels like a kind of a perfect cultural stew. I think one thing that's pretty interesting about this record, is that maybe in comparison to a lot of music from China or music from other markets, in Asia that aren't Korea, essentially, this record's actually done pretty well globally. It's streamed about 20 million times at least, and I'm sure that's gone up since we look at this, and actually charted at number one on reggae charts in the UK. You think that's kind of partially due to this sort of stew that they brewed up of the sort of the whole history of reggae smashed into one album?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's to do with a few of the tracks more than the whole album, I think,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of caught on. But I think whatever qualms people have about reggae, non-Jamaican reggae, it's kind of soothed over it by it being another ethnic kind of reggae. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like the track which really did well, which was Bulan Beauty, which we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just captured people's imaginations for the different sounds and like the fact it was kind of reggae but weird, reggae not as you know it. And I think that's kind of the appeal, reggae but not as you know it type thing. Or it's kind of reggae, but is it reggae? Like when it was getting mixed, it was a sound engineer called Nick Manasseh from the UK, who
Mm-hmm.
who's a reggae legend.
Mm-hmm.
He's produced all kinds of reggae albums over the years, and he was like going, yeah, some of the songs like they are reggae, but they're kind of not reggae either, and I think that was the appeal of it to a lot of people. It's kind of like, well, it's kind of a new style. And that's kind of the Yunnan reggae thing. I think it's kind of claimed parts of it, but it's done enough to just not be just bland, the same old kind of reggae thing that you hear all the time. It's definitely got its own feel.
Yes, you use that word Yunnan reggae, right? So like this is basically an impossible question, but what do you think that means and what differentiates it from, let's start with roots reggae as the sort of simplest point of comparison.
All right, so something like Yunnan reggae. I mean, I guess it's like a in some ways it's a word that's applied by people from outside of Yunnan to make it easier to
Mm,
understand. And there are not really enough bands yet to kind of like separate it out into different kinds of Yunnan reggae. But
hmm.
I mean, but they are different. You know, they're doing different
Right.
things. Different bands are doing different things. Um, it's kind of like, someone going, oh, going to Cuba and going, I love salsa music, and Cubans going, no, that's from New York, or we don't play salsa here. It's that kind of thing. It's yeah. So it's like, yeah, I'd say I think I've lost my train of thought thinking about Cuba then.
Well, I mean,
Um,
the Cuba thing is interesting, right? Because Cuba is also a place that a lot of different influences came together. The music, definitely, a lot of what we think of, right, as kind of Latin music or Latin jazz, basically a combination of things that had its roots in Africa and then had its roots in Africa through the US that got combined together. And reggae in Yunnan is, as I've seen it, as somebody who's been back and forth to reggae back and forth to Yunnan for over 20 years, basically. Um, it is this kind of thing where there's a bunch of different sorts of strains of music globally that are filtered through. And I am just old enough so that when I first came to China, I could go into the shops in Kunming and Dali and actually still buy Dako Dai, which I
yeah,
think are like a pretty important part of this story, and maybe sort of connect back to the reason why there's so many influences in this music and kind of how the genre developed. I mean, I guess first of all, we should probably define what a Dako Dai is for everyone.
okay. So for people that don't know, Adako Dai, they're basically industrial waste. It got shipped over to China and then rescued from being destroyed. I don't know exactly who was doing it and how it happened, but you ended up getting these. The CDs were cut and the tapes. I mean, first it started with tapes, which might have been before you arrived,
Mm-hmm.
um, but very quickly moved on to CDs. And what they did is they cut them, which is daco, um, and cut through the tape and the shell and destroy it. But obviously, you can just open it up and rejoin the tape together, and you miss like a couple of seconds of audio, and then the rest of the tape's okay. And with the CDs, they cut into them, but not right in. So get the first few tracks, and then the last half of the album you wouldn't be able to listen to. But they were cheap, and everyone you could go in the shops. It was like crate digging, I kind of thing. Everyone would just be going in and just looking at covers and going, "I'll have that," and see what that is, and kind of discovering music in a real uh, haphazard, haphazard, in a real haphazard way, and getting these like injections of like weird, random music from different eras and different styles, and just kind of like taking it all on board and seeing what they make of it. It's kind of an interesting period.
Yeah, and so like as somebody who used to work and in some ways run like an evil major label, it was sort of in the process of phasing out physical, but I could talk a little bit more about the kind of records and the kind of music that would have been seen as like industrial waste. So back in the bad old days, like before streaming, or maybe the good old days if you like money, and you were an artist basically. What would happen is you'd have to forecast how many people would buy a certain album, right? And then you'd have to actually have that album made in lots of units. And sometimes you would get that forecast just disastrously wrong. And then what you would do with that is essentially, in many cases, after you had gone through the several stages of purgatory, where maybe your album started out in a nice placement on a rack somewhere, and then it slowly dribbled down, and then it had one of those dreaded, either orange, yellow, or green, the nice price stickers on it. And then if it still didn't sell, what's going to happen is, as Sam said, you take the fucking thing, and you'd cut it in half or cut into it and then ship it. And at that time, which is sort of the 80s and 90s, China was actually kind of one of the places in the world a lot of waste was being sent to be processed. And the legend about it is that sort of a shady underworld figure in Beijing was the guy who figured out that if you glued these things together, you could actually resell them. But kind of what it meant, right, is you had this bizarre menagerie of music that was available. Like you might have the worst album by David Bowie next to the best album by an incredible band who nobody had ever heard of and time had forgotten but didn't sell. And so the guys who are and girls who are going into these stores to buy the stuff, right? They would just have these bizarre record collections and, you know, kind of think it completely normal to listen to like, yeah, I don't know, you know, Neil Young and Metallica and Gloria Estefan at like exactly the same time, which doesn't seem as weird in our modern culture, right? Because we stream a lot of different music and so it's not expensive. But again, in the dark old ages when it was called Burma and Czechoslovakia, like you kind of were more genre specific with your taste because you had to pay for it.
I'm afraid you cut off right through the entire thing that you just said, but I
It
think I
was ex-
understand. I think
it was extremely eloquent, unfortunately, but it was like a long description, basically. It's okay, we'll have it, and they'll be able to cut it out. But essentially, what I was saying was that the fact that everybody would get this sort of weird variety of music next to each other, like you might have a Metallica record and a Gloria Estefan record, and you would think of those as normal, is one of the reasons why sort of artists like Puman and especially the generation before them would feel totally comfortable just throwing off the wall things with each other.
yeah, like I think that is one of the reasons that it's like that. I mean, for me myself as well, like you said, I had a CD collection. I brought it to China, and these CDs would listen to hundreds of times because they're expensive, and I didn't have that many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I took good care of them. I'd have this little brush, brush the dust off and put them back in case they scratched and stuff like that. And I remember lending my CDs to someone in China, and they came back with like footprints on them and stuff like that. There was just like a different attitude towards the value of CDs because they were
Mm-hmm.
much cheaper, like a fraction of the price. You could go and just buy 10, 20 in a day and still have money for beer at night. And but for me as well, when I came to Yunnan, just being able to go and buy all this kind of music and discover it definitely expanded my music taste as well. So I got
Mm-hmm.
a taste of what that was like, just going finding random hip hop records and going, oh, I can buy 10 Motown CDs at the same time and get into that. I never really had the chance to listen to it before. So so yeah, like it made kind of broad but weird um music tastes and yeah, music collections and therefore combinations of influences.
Yeah, again, it was almost like kind of a hyper internet or like a pre-internet or proto-internet where like you would put these things next to each other that would be juxtaposed that you just would never do in a place with kind of a more developed way of sort of sorting genres against each other. It was really interesting. And I guess the other thing that was probably specific to Yunnan versus a lot of other places in China is there were a lot of tourists in Yunnan from a pretty early period, and like a specific kind of tourist, right? Like young backpackers bringing music and engaging in the culture. Curious if that also sort of would have impacted the development of reggae or kind of music in general in that as well.
I mean, at that time, definitely. I mean, I don't remember being able to buy Daco reggae at the
Mm-hmm.
time. It was definitely people bringing it in and DJing it.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain bars where people would come and it was all playing from CDs back then. And yeah, I remember being involved in early reggae parties and it was something to do with Yunnan also being like the local scene and the foreign scene being fairly well integrated. Um, it led to this. I think it was a very important part of reggae being introduced to Yunnan was the people bringing it in and getting involved in the music scene with the local musicians and kind of spreading it like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a big factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a big deal in China generally. I mean, I've heard people besides Kaiser Kuo say that the entire template for Beijing rock music was basically the collection of music Kaiser brought with him originally and started sharing around with people when they were, forming bands in the mid 80s.
Yeah, they do say that. And like I I definitely made reggae happen.
Got our
Yeah,
viral moment out of
yeah.
that. I
If I
think
was
you did.
Kaiser, yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, I brought a load of reggae with me, and yeah, we had well, I was one of many people that did it, but I was definitely one of the people because I was into reggae at the time. I was like a reggae purist. That was my reggae collection, and I remember allowing different bars to copy the entire collection because you could burn them in the CD shops, and then they would have them and playing in the bars all the time. So so yeah, like being involved in the bars and the music scene and stuff like that, it definitely it was a very small thing, but also actually an interesting thing that happened. It became almost a dirty word for a while in
Hmm.
reggae, because the underground scene didn't really embrace it at
Hmm.
first. It was a very kind of like metal punk scene,
Sure.
uh, more metal than punk, but and reggae was kind of a buzzword for like you know being soft and not being hardcore. So I remember like people saying when Tongyang came to Yunnan to play, and they played all their new songs. They were originally pretty heavy, and they played all these new songs, which became the hit songs that made the band.
Hmm.
And people going, "Oh, the next thing they'll be playing reggae." People saying that as kind of an insult, or their appraisal of like what they thought of the show was like, "Oh, playing fucking reggae next." So yeah, it was interesting that happened, but gradually it kind of seeped in, and there were a couple of bands that started doing it or experimenting with a few songs. Sharon was one of the first bands to start doing it. There's another band called Minjian Funk,
Hmm.
um, that had reggae songs like 20 years ago, and then there was a band Sandojao who people
Hmm.
know more about. Um, Yunnan guys in Guangzhou working with like local jazz musicians did
Hmm.
an album, and that was probably the first recorded Yunnan reggae. Um, yeah, and then just the people, just it became more and more part of the Yunnan scene, and gradually crystallized into like, okay, now we're gonna have a red band that just plays reggae, and that was Kawa basically, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and they definitely defined the style more than any other band. Um, and I'd say Puman coming second maybe
Hmm.
as the second most influential Yunnan reggae band.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's especially interesting if you know anything about the history of reggae and Rasta, right? To think of it as being music that's like soft, right? It's sort of, well, it might have those associations now, essentially because of the airbrush Bob Marley that everybody came to know and love. I mean, this is music where, like Talking Blues is about, does it feel like bombing a church, right? I mean, like it's pretty gnarly music.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of lost. That was kind of lost for a while because people didn't understand the lyrics. They just
Mm-hmm.
they just appreciated the vibe of it, and they were like thinking reggae's all about like like being in the sun, drinking in the daytime, chilling out. This was the Yunnan vibe. Yeah, that all the backpackers were kind of bringing in. It was like so the kind of like the real kind of like the message of reggae was kind of like came kind of later. People kind of started investigating what it actually they were talking about, and yeah, so like the kind of like resistance aspect of reggae became more of a thing later, I think.
How did you make that happen? Did you translate Peter Tosh and pamphlet it out to somebody or something? I'm
No,
curious, or was it just like a gradual, you're sort of over a gradual process of people getting more into the music?
well, the more people getting more into it and asking more questions about it from people that could tell them, and then kind of like, because you can can now translate lyrics pretty easily.
Sure.
Um, so people like want to know people what it's kind of like more about wanting to know what it's about. People got more and more into it, wanting to know what they were actually listening to. Um, so your internet, asking people, and just it being a discussion. Yeah,
That's interesting. I mean, obviously, too, it must be somewhat tricky because reggae is kind of pretty overtly political as well, right? And that's something that it's probably
yeah,
best to stay away from that topic, musically in China.
yeah. I mean, not directly. Um, I mean, this Chinese self censorship thing is pretty intense.
Sure.
Um, you don't really need to be censored. Most bands probably know what they should and shouldn't say, and what they can get away with. And if you don't say things directly, you stay away from certain words, and you pretty much get the message of what you're trying to say. But yeah, you want to avoid being too of a color went a bit too hardcore and had to
Yeah.
like take tracks down and uh, yeah. And Puman, like there was a couple of things we had to hide in the lyrics, by using different characters
Mhm.
to replace the actual characters. But yeah, I mean, it's more like Yunnan. Okay, if we get into Yunnan reggae and kind of like what the spirit of it is, it's less about politics than it is about kind of ethnic pride in Yunnan.
Right.
Um, because you've got ethnic groups who've historically been pretty marginalized by Han culture.
Hmm.
That's kind of the definition of an ethnic group is people who resisted being sinicized and did so by like moving to the worst places that they were to live in the province, like on the side of mountains, the worst land, um, basically toughing it out because they wanted to maintain their identity.
Hmm.
That's one way of looking at it. Um, yeah, so you know, is, people that didn't really have a lot of cultural influence, like nationally, and didn't have a lot of pride in their culture. And Yunnan reggae is kind of like jump started that into a massive phenomenon. It's like
Hmm.
now we've got something that we, that's influential, that people like, and it's like, and it represents our culture. It's like we're talking specifically about Wa people. I think
Hmm.
that's where it started. Um, and they've become such a like exuberant and like cultural force in Yunnan just through Yunnan reggae, um, and its influence, and it's definitely a symbol of that. I think it's almost like it's become a tradition. It's become adopted as part of the traditional music.
Hmm.
Like a band Bagadai on the label that you met them in Kunming.
Did.
They did an
Yeah.
album recently, and I went to I mean Shimong is where Yunnan reggae I'd say really started, which is where Kawa are from and Bagadai are from. It's a
Right.
tiny town right on the border of Myanmar, right next to the is it called the United Wa Army? It's a semi-autonomous Wa state in
Yep.
the yeah. Um, it's maybe 60,000 people, 60 to
Hmm.
80,000 people. There's not a single traffic light in the town. And in China, that's saying something because they put traffic lights everywhere. Where there's a slight chance of people not knowing what's going on, there's a traffic light. So no traffic lights in all that shows how small that town is. And so to have so much influence from such a small town It is kind of a phenomenon. So when I
Yeah.
went there, when we went to film with Puman in February, you saw the video of that.
Hmm.
Um,
And so will everyone else
but
very soon.
yeah, yeah, very soon. Bargadai, they were playing it in the villages in almost every place we went. Like you could
Yeah.
hear it playing, and it would just come out, and you could hear it being played in this house and that house as you walk through the village
Yeah.
on repeat for the entire day. Like this was like this was it being accepted as like their own music, and I think that's the difference between reggae and maybe other bands from Yunnan that are trying to do cool ethnic music yet they haven't been accepted to that degree by the kind of like the root culture like that like they have in Shimon. It's a real phenomenon.
I mean, that's, I think amazing to hear because it's, you don't think of, it's easy, especially in the quote unquote air quotes West, to kind of have a stereotype of China and not think of sort of anything other than Beijing or anything other than politics or ideology or maybe business kind of driving the culture. So it's pretty empowering to hear, kind of an outsider group from an outsider part of China make an impact like that, locally, but then also internationally as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kawa just came back from the UK, and Puman are going to Bali, going to Indonesia and Thailand, and possibly France in the coming few months. So, um, I mean, Sharon have played everywhere as well. Manhu
Yeah,
have played around. So Yunnan music's getting out. Yunnan reggae was a bit harder to get out because of maybe like just kind of like the attitude towards reggae and world music not being particularly like warm to it. Um, Maybe because it's just been overdone or it was overdone and there's a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that reggae sound. But I'd say with Yunnan reggae, we really have something which is a little bit different from that. It's something which is developing independently as a cultural phenomenon. It's not just a band going, oh, we'll play some reggae so we can sell records in the West. It's not
no,
how it's
definitely not.
happening. Yeah.
I mean, you listen to Puman's album and like the songs are sort of reggae, as we talked about earlier, but they're sort of not. There are a lot of different genres that are mixed in there, but kind of in every song, what I would consider like the cliches of roots reggae are basically missing from the music, and that's sort of what makes it interesting. Like in the parts of the songs where you would expect to hear, kind of skanking on a guitar, you don't hear skanking on a guitar. And then in the
Right.
parts of a song where you would, expect not to hear skanking on a guitar, you hear it. And so like these cliches are sort of in both the technical term in music and then also, the generic way that we use it. Like they're deployed in a very interesting way.
Yeah. I mean, Puman they've been studying reggae now more. It's been 5 years since that album drops. And in a way, I'm like, don't study it so much. You don't have to, the kind of what made that first album special was the fact that they didn't, they weren't trying to copy reggae. It's just something that they liked, that they weren't trying to be reggae, like, um, so yeah, it's a difficult line to tread that
Yeah,
well how reggae do you go? If you go too far, then it just becomes less interesting maybe for a Western audience because it's less it's more formulaic. It's there's so much reggae from everywhere. It's like what makes it special? So yeah, and in reggae it is a local. It's very much the local music coming into it, which makes it different. You've got the melodies and the instruments and yeah, these different things which gives it its own sound, which is different. Yeah, I mean, reggae would be the most similar style to compare it to, but a lot, maybe 50% of the album isn't really reggae at all.
No, including Belong Beauty. I mean, we'll dive into in a second, like, who's in the band, what they play, and how they play it. I mean, we've done that in other content, but I think it's important. But Belong Beauty is a really interesting song, right? Because if you're analyzing it, I guess the rhythm section kind of sounds more reggae a little bit, right? In terms of the way that the bass and the drums are connecting with each other. But the top lines, and for lack of a better word, the choir or chorus on it, not the chorus musically, but the actual group of people that sound like they're singing together. It doesn't sound anything like reggae at all, really.
Yeah, I mean that song is that's a specific way of creating a song from
Mm-hmm.
something that's really traditional and then trying to fit the band in with what they're doing. Like you could do it the other way, which is kind of like have a reggae song trying to fit something local to it. But I think the power of Bull and Beauty is it's just the strength of the original material. Like I guess a natural selection of like folk tunes means you're going to get left with super strong melodies. The ones which survive and people still sing after all these years are the best ones.
Right.
So so you've got a very strong kind of melody, but it's weird. It's not the time signature. You know, it has bars of extra notes in it,
Yeah, it sure
which
does.
throw.
What is the time signature of that song, by the way?
I have to say I didn't analyze it enough to be able to
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not in a
crazy.
set time. It's not. And this happens with Yunnan music a lot, which is it has a set meter,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it has bars of different lengths all put together. So you
Mm-hmm.
might have a bar of three, a bar of four, a bar of seven. And I think that's to do with dancing as well. Um, like we talked about with Puman, like the number of kicks you put in changes the length of that piece of. So like that idea of having to keep to a 4/4 or a 6/8 structure it doesn't exist.
Right.
Um, that's something which we take for granted, but it doesn't really exist in Yunnan as much. I mean, you have a dance culture, so it doesn't switch up tempos and stuff like that. But it yeah, it's all over the place in terms of like where the phrasing is, and that puts when you're trying to put that to a traditional kind of a standard kind of pop, I'd say pop music or modern music's feel that you end up with a snare coming in back to front, and you know the kick in the wrong place and the
Exactly.
bass
Yeah.
line having so so dealing with that was a big question of how the idea was to not change it to a 4/4 rhythm by chopping it up and like messing with it. Like I suppose a lot of people would do that because it's just too weird for people to appreciate. But if you do it right, people don't notice it. You know,
Yeah.
people just accept. Oh, it sounds a bit weird, but like, they don't actually analyze what it is that's with it. It sounds natural, and I think I don't know how what you thought about it when you first listened to it. You're like, what the hell's going on? Or you're like, oh, it's a bit weird, but I can listen to it. It sounds acceptably like reggae for me to be able to like understand what's going on.
Well, I mean, I loved it instantly because it didn't sound normal, right? I mean, I'm a fan of odd time
Yeah,
signatures. I'm a fan of like conversations, and like that song to me sounds very conversational. Like it sounds like people in a room playing music. It's not on a grid. There's no uh it's not snapped and quantized in a way, right? Like it has a very organic kind of human feel to it, which like you could not imagine, for instance, like software coming up with something that sounds like that. So, I loved it. And
yeah,
what I couldn't figure out though, man, was like who's doing what across the album. Is it the same
uh,
guys playing all the instruments? There are a lot of guests, are they multi-instrumentalists? So I mean, and obviously in this day and age where liner notes exist in some kind of mythical ether, but not in front of you when you're listening most of the time, like it would be great to know like who the guys and girls are, like what they do, what they play, and so everybody can kind of figure out who these amazing musicians are.
Yeah. Okay, so it is a kind of standard lineup of musicians.
Hmm.
Um, the drummer played drums, sung backing vocals. The bass, the bass player played the guitar and bass was one person,
Hmm.
because that wasn't supposed to happen, but the bass player was on holiday in prison.
Oh, a holiday in prison. The in prison part of that was the important part. But yeah, okay.
Well, we call it a holiday. Um, he's on holiday again now, so these things happen. So recording of a new album is interrupted by people taking vacations.
I mean, it's important to
Um,
take holidays, right? It's good for the soul.
yeah, yeah, they come back revitalized. So that was interesting. And the keyboard player Sean,
Hmm.
who's from the USA,
Hmm.
he's now a monk in Bhutan. I think he's the first Western monk to be ordained in Bhutan. It's quite kind of cool. So that's an interesting story. We might be able to get him on a podcast or something.
We like.
We
I
can
think
talk
we
about it.
certainly are. We certainly are going to go into that. Is he's still in the band? Well,
Well, well, he's no, he had to leave the band, um, because when he realized he was going to be ordained, I think he realized that he wasn't going to make it back to rejoin the band. But he played bass on one of the songs, um, and then there's a wind instrumentalist, LaRue, who played
mhm,
almost all of the wind instruments, and then yeah, Laltan singing most of the songs. But so yeah, it was kind of like I played most of the percussion on the album,
mhm,
um, and a couple of like I think I played the hulusha on Sando Jiao.
mhm.
Um, and there are obviously a couple of guest performers, most predominantly on Bulan Beauty. And
Right.
that it's kind of the black sheep of the album. That song it definitely stands
Yeah.
out from the others. Yeah, um, yeah, and I think that's why it was best received overseas. I mean, Nick when he that was the first song I gave to Nick Manasseh
Mhm.
to kind of assess whether he'd be willing to help mix the album because I wanted to give him the one which should have the most impact. He'd be like, "Oh man, this is great," and that did happen. He was like, "This is amazing. Like, I wanna do it." And after he'd done that, I then sent him the other songs.
That's very
um,
smart. Congratulations on being a great, that's absolutely like that's a perfect label head move. Like I want to work with this person who's like legendary. Here's the track that I know is like a super standout, and you send them first. You got him hooked right in. Congratulations. That's amazing.
yeah, so I mean, he liked the rest of the album as well, but that was definitely the one. And then that got picked up by DJ DSK, who is the person that introduced me to Nick
Right.
in the first place. And he heard Nick's dub version of it. He's like, "Wow, that sounds amazing," because Nick did dubs of most of the songs
Right.
as a kind of a bonus. Um, so we had this dub, and he's like, "I want to do a remix of the dub." So we sent him the stems of the dub, and he did his own mix, the DSK mix to the dub, and that was what we put out on 7 inch. And it was interesting. We had the dub version as the A side and the original as the B side, which isn't what you'd normally do. But Nick, his label DNA Records, he put it out. He thought like, no, the dub is the style that I want to do as a record label, and
Hmm.
the original song is kind of like for interest's sake on the other side. But it turned out people listened to the B side just as much as the A side,
Sure.
and that's where the number one came from. It was the Juno 7 inch reggae charts,
Hmm.
and Nick Manasseh having his name on the record obviously helped with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it got to number one on the dub charts and number
Right.
four in the reggae charts. Um, I mean, I don't really, there's probably about only 100 albums released on 7 inch, in a month in the UK, probably. So it's a fairly niche chart. But still,
It's better to
Max
be
wrote.
number one out of it's better to be number one out of 100 than to be number 100 out of 100, though, brother.
Well, we had Max Romeo at number two. It felt pretty good.
Exactly. That's amazing. So, what language is Belong Beauty in? What language are these guys singing in? Because that's an interesting part of this equation as well.
Well, that's Bulang language. Bulang is
Right.
the name of the ethnic group, and Bulang language is the language that they speak. Um, it's an just so I get anthropological here. It's an
Please, we absolutely.
it's an Austronesian language.
It's not a Sino-Tibetan language.
No, it's Austronesian, which
Wow.
is in, and so like Wa and Bulang and Deang, three ethnic groups that are closely related, and they are Austronesian. So they came from a totally different place. And there's a theory that they all came from Taiwan based on
Okay.
linguistics. Of Austronesian, the biggest, highest concentration of Austronesian languages is in
Right.
Taiwan. And normally
Sure.
you'd that be like English, you look at the
Right.
different variations in English, that must be the root of the language, therefore the root of the population to some degree. The shit the so so yeah, so the other Austronesians would be like, did we talk about this in the last podcast?
We're
Or
going to
did
talk
we just
about it
talk
at
about
every
it for that?
podcast. We talked about linguistics, but not specifically Austronesian stuff.
So like Maoris, Pacific
Yeah.
Islanders, etc. That's all Austronesian. And then eastwards towards, you've got Austronesians in Madagascar, etc., the Indian Ocean and
Right.
Pacific. They were seafaring people, but I guess there were some people that didn't take to the seas and came overland to Yunnan because, we know, Yunnan's very far from the ocean.
Very far from the ocean.
Yeah.
How does do you think the language has an impact on the music? Like, does it make it kind of sit easier in the reggae idiom? Would you say?
Well, I mean, a lot of the reggae bands don't sing in Wa or
Right.
Bulang, um, but quite a lot of it is. And
Hmm.
and when it was starting up, those were the songs which got popular.
Yeah.
And I definitely say, yeah, it's some styles Chinese Mandarin just doesn't suit.
Yeah.
Um, and when Kawa or Puman sing in Chinese, they're singing kind of like a more of a dialect
Hmm.
rather than Beijing Chinese reggae, which I don't know, it for me it didn't work so well.
Can we
So
throw
yeah,
some shade at? You want to throw some shade at Long Shendao together or something?
no, I
I'm
don't. I wasn't
joking.
going to mention Long Sindel by name. Um, yeah,
No,
a
they're
cool
friends of
band,
they're friends of both of ours. They're friends of both of ours, by the way. So yeah, we're
a
just
very
kidding.
cool band, a very cool band, and influential themselves. Definitely influenced
Hugely
people in
influential.
Yunnan. Yeah, um, yeah. I just prefer the Yunnan stuff. That's my preference.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting the way these languages work, and I think like obviously if you hear, let's say, people from China speaking in Mandarin and you don't know the language, and you were to compare it to like people from the American South or the Caribbean speaking either French or English, and you didn't know the language, I think one of the first things that you would notice is that either the English or the French is going to be very like behind the beat. It's going to be very drawn back, and Mandarin is going to be like very in front of the beat, very fast. And so I think I've always thought this is part of the reason why some of the, let's say, vocal styles don't translate to every international genre very well.
Yeah, I mean, you cut out a little bit there, but yeah, I got basically what you're saying. Um,
So, um, what's next for these guys? They made a big record. It was 2019. There was some, little pandemic or something that happened in between that made life difficult. There has been a holiday. Like, what's next on the agenda for Puman? How are they going to follow up this record?
Okay, so the band's kind of in flux. We've changed the bass and guitar player,
Mhm.
Afu, who's left the band, and he stood in for people while they were on holiday when we were recording. He's now gone, and um, there's a new guitarist joining the band. There's a new bass player because some bass players are on holiday. Um, so there's flux. There's a new album which has been kind of stalling because of all these changes, and but yeah, there's a new album that's basically ready to be recorded,
Mhm.
and there's a couple of new tracks which are just out. We're going to release a new track from Pullman in August
Right.
called
Single in
Yengo.
August, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's new material coming out, and the band's definitely looking to play more internationally now.
Mhm.
Um, as I said, we've got Southeast Asian stuff happening, with the potential of something happening in France and the US. We hope, with your help.
Well, that's why we're talking, right? It's kind of the
Yeah,
one of the whole conversations, and I think that you know, I do think that the U.S. can be a really big market for Puman, and I think that a big part of that is I think Puman are pretty good live, right? In
yeah,
terms of how they would stack up against maybe what you might think of some other Chinese bands, right? So, and obviously in the U.S., very important, very competitive live music market.
yeah, yeah. We certainly discovered that before. So yeah, I mean, it's always as always it's a foot in the door
Mm-hmm.
situation. Um, once the Chinese band gets a foot in the door, and then they become the band that did it, then suddenly all these opportunities start opening up. So yeah, the foot in the door for Puman. We need to find out what that's going to be.
We're working on it. I mean, I think that one of the good things about where they're at right now is Blonde Beauty did, I think, well in the UK and did really well in China. But there's obviously a significant audience in the US that hasn't heard it. You're going to be able to hear it completely for free. If you're too cheap to have Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, you can just go over to the Sea of Wood YouTube page. You're going to be able to hear it with a pretty dope visualizer that actually takes a bunch of elements from Bulan culture and animates them. And then there's going to be a lot more from the band going forward in terms of releases and potentially, hopefully, I think remixes and just all kinds of other fun stuff that we want to work on. Because hopefully there'll be a day where this podcast is you and I talking to other people about kind of what they're doing with the band and all your artists and kind of how they're integrating together. So I think it's a very exciting period, and you know, they can go from holidays to holiday inns all across the U.S.
Yeah. So
It's my dad
uh,
joke. Dad joke for the day
that's a
here.
that, that's a pretty cool joke.
I
No,
mean,
um,
what's the album title, right? We get them. We go to like I don't know, fucking Billings, Montana, and they're in like the Holiday Inn in Billings, Montana. You get all the Chinese guys, Chinese reggae, not reggae musicians from China, excuse me, um, kind of out in front of the Holiday Inn, and there's your album cover right there. Big sky behind them, some mountains, which leads me to the last, and I know your favorite question here when you're talking to people about Puman, right? As you have to do as a label head,
yeah.
how do you get people excited? What do you say about them that kind of differentiates them from other artists?
Mm, basically, what the message that I try to convey is is that we're not talking about a Chinese band in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to kind of the long way, and it's to do with like music in general and how we want to promote it. It's like you know the idea of non-Chinese stuff in China is kind of like an alien idea People are like, what?
Sure.
What are you talking about? Then non-Chinese, like so. So so if we take the long way around, what I try and do is I try and explain that China, we have China, which is like what people expect from China, which is like kind of like Beijing, Tiananmen, and huge like grey buildings and pollution and like kind of like austere, kind of like part like uh, maybe I should stop talking about this. But anyway, the connotations of the kind of like the ideas of what China is to people does not fit with what Puman do, and it doesn't fit with what Yunnan music is like. So what I try and do is just try and go, look, this is gonna completely change what you think of China, and that's the message I try and give people, and that because people can't get away from our Chinese music. It's gonna there's this preconception of what it's gonna be. Trying to break that down is the hardest thing. As soon as you say the word China, they're thinking already it's 50% doors closed.
Sure.
I feel that. Yeah. Sorry, my
Yeah,
phone just went off.
it's good. It adds authenticity to this. I mean, I think the other thing that happens with a lot of music in China is you get the good for construction. Oh, this is really good for China. Or like
Yeah.
this is really good for. I mean, you and I were in Beijing at the same time, and you would see a million different bands, and it was clear that those bands all would have a template. Like they would have a couple of albums or a couple of bands they'd be really influenced by, and their goal as a band was to be able to play shows and do independent releases because they could sound like X and be good enough for China, like be good for China. And what I think is really interesting about all the bands on Sea of Wood is they're just like they're good. And you don't have to have any idea where they're from in order to kind of like I don't want to say make excuses, but let's be more polite and say contextualize the reason why the music sounds the way it does.
Yeah. I definitely noticed that. It's like, especially, I remember when the punk scene got international. I
Yes.
can't remember which I can't remember which magazine they were on the cover of, but it's like Vogue or something like that. It's like
Mm,
Chinese punks, and it was all just the juxtaposition of this is China and not what you expect, but a gimmick. I don't want it to be a gimmick. I want it to be, you disband, and you don't have to tell people that it's a Chinese band. Let them guess for themselves. Like when we did the rough guide, um, the cover was like, let's find something which you can't tell where it's from unless you look carefully. It's like having Yunnan, talking about Yunnan, but not mentioning China. It's having people guessing and kind of like wanting to find out more about what is this place. Where is it even? Is it Central Asia? Is it Southeast Asia? It's obviously Asia somewhere, but like, is it like near Mongolia, or is it? Looking at pictures and you know, hearing the music and going, like, where the hell's that from? I think that's part of the discovery process of people wanting to get into Yunnan music in general. So yeah, it was not really fit on a billboard, but you know, I can't think of how to condense that down to like a slogan.
I don't know. Music from nowhere. We can workshop it offline. I mean, not everything has to pass the billboard thing, which is a very challenging and annoying question, which is why I ask it. You got to have one thing in the process that's just really, really ridiculous. I mean, I think that we've kind of connected and covered about most of the stuff that I think contextualizes where the band is and what they're doing and where they want to go. Is there anything important you think we've missed or left out that the audience would like to know?
um, no, I think we've covered a lot of stuff. Like I mean, I don't. I'm just interested in who's people who will be listening to this. Who is it going to be? Like it's going to be a lot of different people who are curious about something new. and
Yeah.
curious about coming upon random content and being like, hang on a minute, I'm going to listen to these two guys talking about something which I probably don't know anything about and get interested in it. So so just the fact that anyone's tuning in is just like super cool.
And
And if you
we'll definitely get
and if people
people.
do
We'll
and if
definitely
people
get
do know
people for
about
sure.
Yunnan, if people do know about Yunnan and China, I mean, people know about China, but maybe not about Yunnan. And even people that have lived in Yunnan for years still probably don't know what we're talking about. So it's a very kind of interesting subject, which we could talk for much more time about. But I think we've covered like enough for people to like get an idea of what Yunnan reggae is and what Puman are doing. And the next thing is just listen to the music, like
Yeah.
um, that's what we want. Are you going to splice some music into this?
We may splice some music into this, but probably with an intro and an outro. I mean, I think the other thing, my hope for this always is that people obviously go back and they listen to it, and that people argue with us, and people have different opinions, and explain in the comments section where we're wrong or kind of what their attitude about it is. To me, that's always the most interesting thing, because you're trying to have a dialogue with people that are interested in music, and you have opinions about it. I think that's a really important thing. And yeah, it's funny, right? It goes back to the old Keith Richards quote that I think he said that music and sex were the same, where it's the only two things that you talk about more than you actually do.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, for better or worse, this era sort of expects music to be contextualized. The great part about it is you can have a genre go viral really quickly, right? And people can get go really deep and then learn everything there is to learn and do everything really quickly and engage it, which would have been utterly impossible a long time ago. The challenge of that, though, is it can be sort of surface level. But I think that the good news is like the sea of wood sea runs pretty deep, right? There's a lot to dig into and a lot more coming up. And we have a ton more content that we're making and a ton more music. So I mean the best thing that you could do is kind of follow, obviously hit like and subscribe on the YouTube page. If you've made it this far, God damn it, definitely hit like and subscribe for sure. And keep following what we're doing, and we'll continue to have conversations where either Sam or I are in bad form because of the inherent time difference and all of it. So, been a lot of fun today, though. I enjoyed it, and I think that as we do this more, we're going to obviously have more guests and more different people and more different things that we do. So, very excited about the future of the podcast and the future of the label.
Yeah, cool, cool. I think we talked about some interesting stuff. See what happens.
See what happens. That
See
could
what
be the
happens.
model. That's the billboard. See what happens.